The problem with modern exhaustion is that most people don't even realize it's happening. It is a systemic hijacking of your neural hygiene, deceptively masked as the resilient Australian battler spirit. It doesn't arrive with a bang. It builds quietly, a compounding cognitive tax levied every time you traverse the Sydney CBD or wait for that delayed late-night train in the Melbourne rain. An extra hour of digital friction at midnight, a few more open loops in your executive function. You aren't decompressing. You are fragmenting your dopaminergic baseline. Constant noise, constant stimulation. Podcasts during the commute, scrolling through lunch at Circular Quay, notifications bleeding into your REM cycle. You have outsourced your internal reflection to a sequence of algorithms. And eventually, your brain loses its capacity for metacognition. It forgets how to be still. Not just calm still. Your mind has become a stranger to its own silence. Because there is a fundamental cognitive distinction. A calm mind can focus. A tired mind just scrolls, seeking a dopamine hit it will never truly satisfy. Most Melbourne and Sydney professionals don't realize how mentally fragmented their executive function has become until they try to sit in silence for 5 minutes and find they physically cannot endure the stillness without reaching for a screen. That is the uncomfortable reality. This isn't weakness. It isn't laziness. It's chronic overstimulation, quietly repeated every single day until it becomes your new baseline. So this isn't about some hack to become a genius. It's about the architectural rebuilding of your attention. Slowly, methodically, quietly. Think of it as training a cognitive muscle that nobody else can see, but everyone will eventually feel. It's the ultimate competitive advantage in a world of noise. The first exercise looks deceptively simple. A grid of numbers, 1 to 36, scattered randomly across the screen. At first glance, it feels childish, almost pointless, until the timer starts, and suddenly your eyes panic. Your attention jumps around the screen searching for patterns that don't exist. Your peripheral vision strains under the cognitive jitter. Your brain starts rushing ahead, desperate to outrun the clock. This is the Schulte Table. What makes this protocol so potent isn't raw intelligence or your IQ. It's about pure resistance. This exercise forces your internal architecture to slow down enough to actually organize the chaos. Not emotionally. You aren't calming your feelings. You are calming your visual processing. Those who commit to this neuro-regulative training notice a shift after a fortnight. Something strange happens to the noise. They read differently, think differently. Even conversations feel clearer. It is a fundamental recalibration of your neural architecture, shifting from frantic scanning to surgical precision. Because attention, like metabolic fitness, adapts to structured pressure. If you do not demand attentional hypertrophy, your cognitive endurance will continue to atrophy. Most people never train their focus at all. They merely hope it survives the day. And maybe that's the real crisis now. We are a society of cognitive amateurs in a professional-grade distraction economy. We've built lives that constantly consume our attention capital without ever implementing a protocol to strengthen the reserve. You are running on a depleted battery, wondering why the screen is dimming. You can feel it on the morning train into Flinders Street or Central. Everyone staring downward, succumbing to digital drift, oblivious to the cognitive decay of the silent epidemic. Eyes flickering in the blue light, thumbs twitching in an automated, lifeless dance. Look around the morning commute. Nobody is truly alone with their own thoughts anymore. We have outsourced our inner silence to the infinite scroll. The next cognitive recalibration feels even stranger. Words will manifest in conflicting colors. It is an ambush on your reflexive processing, designed to expose the cracks in your mental fortress. Do not read the text. That is the path of least resistance, the digital drift. You must override the habit, bypass the literal, and articulate only the color itself. Reclaim the wheel of your own consciousness. Deceptively simple, until you feel the cognitive friction the moment your prefrontal cortex begins wrestling with your autopilot. It is a civil war occurring within your neural pathways. The word says red. The color is blue. In that microsecond of hesitation, your concentration fractures. This is where your attention capital is either liquidated by the noise or forged into steel. It's uncomfortable in a very specific way, because for a second, you realize how automatic your mind has become. You are no longer the navigator. You are merely the passenger in your own biological machinery. Most thinking isn't actually conscious anymore. It's prediction, habit, speed. It is the neural inertia of the Sydney commute, where your brain optimizes for efficiency at the cost of actual presence. This exercise interrupts that pattern. It injects a deliberate cognitive friction into your mental circuitry to break the spell of the digital drift. It forces your prefrontal cortex to override the reflexive bypass. It demands you stop reacting to the noise and start perceiving the signal to see what is actually in front of you. Which sounds small, until you realize how much of modern life, from the CBD boardrooms to the quiet suburbs, runs entirely on a hollowed-out autopilot. Then there's the blindfold exercise, a forced descent into the internal theater where your neural inertia has no place to hide. No productivity hacks, no expensive biohacking tools curated for the Melbourne elite, just silence and the absolute absence of sight. Pick up a pen. Try writing your name with your eyes closed. Attempt to map your own identity without the crutch of visual feedback. At first, it feels ridiculous, a primitive fumble. Then, a sudden vulnerability. You realize your cognitive scaffold is far more fragile than you'd care to admit. You notice the desperation to open your eyes. That is your brain panicking as its illusion of control evaporates. You are realizing just how dependent you've become on external certainty. But something profound happens once the ego stops panicking in the dark. Your cognitive awareness sharpens. You move from frantic grasping to a state of flow that doesn't require sight to realize its purpose. This is the proprioceptive shift. You begin to sense the volume of the room and the weight of the silence. You start feeling space differently, movement differently. You are reclaiming your internal radar. The neural architecture adapts with brutal efficiency when forced. It's the law of neuroplasticity. However, our hyper-optimized modern comfort has systematically removed almost every opportunity for this grit to form. We have digitized our survival and, in doing so, atrophied our souls. GPS removed the art of navigation. Algorithms remove the burden of memory. Smartphones remove the fertile soil of boredom. Convenience is a seductive utility. But let's be clear, too much convenience makes the mind passive. It turns the Australian battler into a passenger in their own consciousness. There's another exercise that almost looks like a joke, a bit of playground silliness in the middle of your Melbourne commute. One hand forms a peace sign, the other forms an OK sign. Then you switch them back and forth, faster, realize the lag. Simple for children whose neuroplasticity is still raw, surprisingly difficult for the high-functioning professional stuck in a loop of automated routines. Because coordination isn't just physical, it's neurological timing, the symphony of your motor cortex trying to reclaim its lost rhythm. Your brain trying to manage two competing actions at once without collapsing into the cognitive confusion that mirrors your daily exhaustion. Let's be honest. This is the default state for the suburban battler. A cluttered cognitive dashboard. Too many tabs open in your psyche, burning metabolic energy on loops that never close. There's no stillness in the Sydney commute, only the noise of unresolved bandwidth. This is where we initiate neural recalibration, one of the most underrated tools in the mentor's arsenal, unilateral motor disruption. Simply using your non-dominant hand to break the domestic trance. Brushing your teeth with the opposite hand. Unlocking your device with the wrong thumb. These are microshocks to your somatic system. Tiny disruptions to the autopilot that governs your mundane CBD existence. Your prefrontal cortex registers the friction immediately. Routine is biomechanically efficient, sure, but it's also a sedative. It dulls your presence and leaves you vulnerable to the burnout creep. Re-engineering the familiar triggers a cognitive awakening. Not a loud, chaotic explosion, but a quiet, structural reboot. You're finally turning the lights back on in the dark corners of your focus. The same way early morning gym sessions change someone over time. Not through intensity, through repetition. You are not just moving weights. You are re-engineering your neural baseline. This is the micro-architecture of the soul being rebuilt in the quiet hours. And maybe that's the hardest lesson to accept. Real mental strength rarely looks impressive while it's happening. It looks boring. It is the pragmatic stoicism of a Melbourne winter, finding peace in the stillness rather than the noise of the crowd, someone sitting with discomfort instead of escaping it. No dopamine traps disguised as entertainment. Real cognitive friction, chess, Sudoku, deliberate mental load. These are the tools used to reclaim your focus from the digital parasites that colonize our attention, things that require patience instead of stimulation. Because convenience slowly removes mental effort from ordinary life. Nobody sit with uncertainty long enough to think deeply anymore. We have outsourced our very intuition to the algorithm. Discipline today is simply resisting constant stimulation, choosing difficulty on purpose, not to become exceptional, just to feel mentally alive again, rebuilding presence, quietly, one repeated action at a time. Again tomorrow. Reclaim your mind.